My mom treated me like I was a burden my whole life. That's not an exaggeration or some self-pitying overstatement. It's just the truth I learned to live with. The way some people learn to live with a bad knee or chronic migraines. You adjust. You compensate. You tell yourself it's normal until you almost believe it. My name is Owen Smith. I'm 28 years old, and this is the story of the Christmas that changed everything. It was Christmas Eve when Emily and I pulled up to my parents' house in the suburbs of Portland. The house looked exactly as it always had, a modest two-story with white siding and dark green shutters, a wreath on the door that my mother probably hung with the same joyless efficiency she approached everything involving me. Snow had started to fall. Dusting the evergreens in the yard was something that should have felt magical but only made me anxious. "You okay?" Emily asked, her hand finding mine on the gear shift. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. This was her first time meeting my parents. 6 months we'd been dating, and I'd managed to avoid this moment until she'd finally asked the question I'd been dreading. "Are you ashamed of me, or are you ashamed of them?" The answer was complicated. My mother opened the door before we even reached the porch. Linda Smith stood there in a burgundy sweater and pressed slacks, her blonde hair styled perfectly, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. She'd always been beautiful in that cold, untouchable way, like a department store mannequin brought to life. "Owen," she said, her tone suggesting mild surprise as if she hadn't known we were coming, even though I'd confirmed it 3 times. Her gaze slid to Emily. "And this must be Emily, was it?" "Yes, Mrs. Smith, it's so nice to finally meet you." Emily extended her hand with genuine warmth. My mother looked at it for a beat too long before shaking it briefly. "Owen's finally bringing someone home. We were starting to wonder if he ever would." There it was, 30 seconds, and she'd already landed the first blow. Inside, my father sat in his leather recliner, hidden behind the Sunday Oregonian despite it being Tuesday. "Hey, Dad." "Owen." He lowered the paper just enough for me to see his eyes, then raised it again. Robert Smith had perfected the art of being present while completely absent. He'd been doing it my entire life. Emily squeezed my hand as we followed my mother into the house. I watched her taking it all in. The living room with its beige furniture and carefully arranged throw pillows, the formal dining room we only used for holidays, the photos on the walls. Lots of photos, actually. My parents at their wedding, my parents on vacation in Hawaii, my parents at some charity gala, my mother graduating from community college when I was 10. "This is a lovely home," Emily said, because she was kind and didn't know what else to say. "Thank you," my mother replied. "Owen, why don't you show Emily the guest room? You'll be staying in separate rooms, of course." Of course. I was 28 years old, but in this house, I'd always be treated like a child, or worse, like an inconvenience she was forced to accommodate. We headed upstairs with our bags, and I led Emily past my parents' room, past the bathroom, past the room that should have been mine but never was. I stopped in front of it without meaning to. "What's wrong?" Emily asked. I stared at the closed door, at the little painted sign that read, "Craft Room," in my mother's perfect cursive. This was supposed to be my room when I was a kid, but it never was. Emily's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, my mother's voice cut through from downstairs, sharp and commanding. "Owen! Emily! Dinner's ready!"
Dinner was the kind of uncomfortable that settled into your bones. We sat at the formal dining table, my mother at one end, my father at the other. Emily and me squeezed together on one side like we needed to present a united front, which I suppose we did. My mother had made pot roast with all the fixings. She was a good cook, I'd give her that. But every dish felt like evidence in a case she was building. Look what I do. Look what I provide. Look how I sacrifice. "So, Emily," my mother said, cutting her meat with surgical precision, "Owen tells me you work in marketing." "Yes, I do digital marketing for a tech startup downtown. It's exciting work." "That's nice." My mother's tone suggested it was anything but. "Stable?" Emily blinked. "I'm sorry?" "The job. Is it stable? These tech companies, they fold all the time. I hope you're not too invested in it." "Mom," I said quietly. "What? I'm just making conversation." She took a sip of wine. "You know, Owen had such potential. When he was younger, I thought he might actually amount to something." The "might actually" hit me like a physical thing. Emily's hand found my knee under the table and squeezed. My father turned a page of the newspaper he'd brought to the table, which should have been absurd, but was just par for the course. My phone buzzed. I glanced at it, a text from my grandmother. "Flying in tomorrow morning. Can't wait to see you, sweetheart." My mother noticed me looking at my phone. "Who's that?" "Grandma Margaret. She's coming tomorrow for Christmas dinner." Something flickered across my mother's face. If I didn't know better, I'd have called it fear. "Tomorrow?" She said she wasn't sure she could make it. Guess she decided she could. My mother's jaw tightened. She set down her fork with a little too much force. "Well, I suppose we'll need to set another place." The rest of dinner passed in tense silence, broken only by the scrape of silverware and my father's occasional throat clearing. When we finished, I started helping clear the table, old habits, but my mother waved me off. "I'll handle it. Why don't you show Emily around the neighborhood? I'm sure she'd love to see it." It wasn't a suggestion. Emily and I grabbed our coats and escaped into the December evening. The moment the door closed behind us, she turned to me. "Owen." "I know." "No, you don't know, because if you knew how completely unacceptable that was—" "I know, Em. Trust me. I've lived it for 28 years. She studied my face in the glow of the porch light. "Why do you subject yourself to this?" I didn't have a good answer. Because she's my mother? Because I keep hoping it'll be different? Because I'm still that little boy who just wanted her to love me? Before I could formulate any response, we heard it. Shouting from inside the house. My mother's voice sharp and furious, coming from somewhere near the kitchen. "I said for you not to come. You're gonna ruin everything." Emily and I froze on the walkway. Through the window, I could see my mother pacing in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, her face contorted with an anger I'd seen directed at me countless times, but never quite like this. "I don't care what you think you need to say, Mother. Some things are better left—" Pause, listening. "That's not your decision to make." Emily looked at me. I looked at her. And in that moment, I knew, whatever was coming tomorrow, whatever truth my grandmother was bringing with her, it was going to change everything.
Christmas morning arrived with the kind of crisp, cold clarity that makes Portland winters feel almost magical. Almost. I'd barely slept, the echo of my mother's phone call playing on a loop in my head. Emily had fallen asleep holding my hand, her presence the only thing keeping me tethered. I slipped out of bed at 6 and headed downstairs, desperate for coffee and a moment alone to gather my thoughts. But the kitchen light was already on. My father stood at the counter, staring into a mug like it held answers he'd been searching for his whole life. "Morning," I said. He looked up startled, as if I'd caught him doing something he shouldn't. "Owen, you're up early." "Couldn't sleep." I poured myself coffee from the pot he'd made. "Big day and all." We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. Then, surprising me, he asked, "How's work going? The design stuff?" My father never asked about my work, never asked about anything, really. "It's good. Actually, really good. I got offered something." His eyebrows raised slightly. "Oh?" "Yeah, a firm in Barcelona wants me to come work for them. 2-year contract. It's exactly the kind of opportunity I've been dreaming about." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. International clients, innovative projects, the chance to really establish myself in the field. Something passed over my father's face. He set down his mug carefully, precisely. That sounds great, son. Really great. You don't sound like you think it's great." He glanced toward the stairs, then back at me. "Your mother won't like it." There it was again. Your mother won't like it. The refrain of my childhood. Don't make noise, your mother won't like it. Don't bring friends over, your mother won't like it. Don't exist too loudly or too much or at all. Why? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Why would it matter to her what I do with my career? She's never shown any interest in it before. My father opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. For a second, I thought he might actually tell me something real, something true. Then the moment passed. It's complicated. You know how she is. No, Dad, I don't know how she is. I know that she treats me like I'm some kind of obligation she's forced to fulfill, but I don't know why. I don't know what I did that was so terrible that... Owen, his voice was sharp, a warning. Don't. Don't what? Don't ask questions? Don't want to understand why my own mother can barely stand to look at me? Footsteps on the stairs saved him from having to answer. Emily appeared, wrapped in her robe, hair sleep tousled and beautiful. Morning, she said, softly, reading the tension immediately. Everything okay? Fine, my father said, already retreating. I should go shower. Your mother will want help with the dinner preparations. He disappeared, leaving Emily and me alone in the kitchen. She moved to my side, and I pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. You okay? She asked. Barcelona, I said. I'm going to take it. Whatever happens today, whatever this thing is with my grandmother, I'm taking the job. Emily pulled back to look at my face. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything. We spent the morning helping prepare for Christmas dinner, though helping mostly meant staying out of my mother's way while she orchestrated everything with military precision. The turkey, the sides, the table settings, all of it had to be perfect. It always had to be perfect. Around 11, as I was chopping vegetables in the kitchen, I heard my mother's voice from the office down the hall. She was on the phone again, her tone low and intense. I shouldn't have listened. I should have stayed in the kitchen and minded my own business. But I didn't. I moved closer to the office door, which he'd left slightly ajar. My mother's back was to me as she stood by the window, phone pressed to her ear. He was my biggest mistake, she said, her voice thick with something between regret and rage. My whole life would be completely different if I could go back. I'd be in Paris right now, living the life I deserved.
The words hit me like a physical blow. I stood frozen in the hallway, my hands still gripping the kitchen towel I'd been holding, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might crack through my ribs. My biggest mistake. I'd always known, on some level, you don't grow up the way I did without understanding that you're unwanted. But knowing and hearing are different things. Knowing is a suspicion you can rationalize away on good days. Hearing is a door slamming shut, final and absolute. The scholarship to Paris, my mother continued, oblivious to my presence. Full ride, everything paid for. I was going to study fashion design, live in the 6th arrondissement, become someone. And then, she made a sound, half laugh, half sob. Then, I got pregnant, and it all disappeared. 28 years. That's how long I've been stuck here. And for what? My vision blurred. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt Emily's arms around me. She had followed me from the kitchen and now held me as I fell apart in the hallway of my childhood home. Owen, she whispered. Oh, Owen. What neither of us noticed was the front door opening. What we didn't hear was the quiet click of heels on hardwood floor. What we didn't see was my grandmother, Margaret Chen, standing in the entryway with her suitcase, her coat still dusted with snow from the Portland morning, her face a mask of heartbreak and fury. But my mother saw her. Linda Smith turned from the window and froze. The phone slipped from her hand, clattering onto the desk. For a moment, nobody moved. We were all statues in some terrible tableau, me with tears streaming down my face,
Emily holding me, my mother caught in the act of her cruelty, and my grandmother, 82 years old and barely 5 feet tall, standing there like an avenging angel. "Mom," Linda said, her voice strangled. You weren't supposed to." "Wasn't supposed to what?" Margaret's voice was steady, calm, and absolutely terrifying. "Arrive early, hear you, finally understand what you've been doing to your son all these years?" My mother's face went through a series of expressions: shock, shame, defiance, and finally something like panic. "This is a private conversation. You had no right to—" "No right?" Margaret set down her suitcase with deliberate care. "Linda Marie Smith, I have every right. More right than you can possibly imagine." She walked into the house, her small frame somehow commanding all the space. My father appeared at the top of the stairs, drawn by the commotion. Margaret looked at each of us in turn, her gaze lingering on me with such tenderness it made my chest ache. "Where's Robert?" she asked. "Right here," my father said quietly, descending the stairs. "Good. Everyone in the living room, now." It wasn't a request. We moved like sleepwalkers, my mother, my father, Emily, and me. Margaret was the last to enter the living room, closing the French doors behind her with a soft click that felt like a judge's gavel. She didn't sit. She stood before us, this tiny woman in her wool coat and sensible shoes, and I saw for the first time how much strength she'd always carried, how much she'd seen and borne and kept silent about. 30 years, she said softly. "I've kept quiet for 30 years. I told myself it wasn't my place, that it was your life, Linda, your choice, that maybe I was wrong about what I saw, what I feared." She looked at my mother. "But I wasn't wrong, was I?" "Mother, please, no." The word cut through the air. "I'm done. Owen deserves the truth. He's deserved it his whole life." She turned to me and her eyes were wet. "Sweet boy, there's something your mother has hidden from you, something that explains everything, though it excuses nothing." My mother stood abruptly. "Don't you dare!" Margaret's gaze didn't waver. "Sit down, Linda." "This is my house. Sit down." My mother sat. I'd never seen anyone command her like that. I'd never seen her back down from anything. Margaret turned back to me, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle. "Owen, I need to tell you about the day you were born, about the choice your mother made, about the choice I forced her to unmake, and about the burden you've carried ever since."
The room held its breath. Even the house seemed to be listening, waiting. My grandmother stood before us like someone preparing to defuse a bomb, careful, steady, knowing that the wrong word might detonate everything. "Your mother was 21 when she got pregnant," Margaret began, her eyes on me. "Just graduated from Portland State with a degree in fashion design, top of her class. She'd been awarded a scholarship, a full scholarship, to study at the Institut Français de la Mode in Paris. It was everything she'd worked for, her dream." I glanced at my mother. She'd gone very still, her face turned toward the window, jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping beneath her skin. "The scholarship was for 2 years, non-transferable, non-deferrable. She had to start that September or lose it. And in March, she found out she was pregnant. The pieces were starting to fall into place, a puzzle I'd never known I was solving. She came to me in tears," Margaret said, "terrified. Not because she was scared to be a mother, Owen, because she didn't want to be one. Because she saw you," her voice caught, "she saw you as the end of everything she'd worked for." "Grandma," I whispered. But I didn't know what I was asking for. For her to stop? To continue? To rewind time? "She wanted to give you up for adoption." The words hung in the air like smoke. "She'd already researched agencies, already found a family, a couple in Seattle who couldn't have children. She had it all planned out. Beside me, Emily made a small sound. Her hand found mine and gripped it hard. I was newly widowed. Your grandfather had died just 6 months earlier, and I was lost, drowning in grief and loneliness. When Linda told me her plan, She closed her eyes briefly. I begged her not to do it. I told her I would help with everything, financially, emotionally, physically. I told her she could still have a career, still have her life. I promised her she wouldn't have to do it alone. You manipulated me, my mother said, her voice low and venomous. She finally looked up and her eyes were blazing. You knew. You knew all of this when we met. You knew Owen wasn't planned, wasn't wanted. You knew I'd given up Paris for him. My father's face had gone gray. He couldn't meet my eyes. Margaret's voice cut through again, sharp now. Robert met Linda when Owen was 3. He knew the situation, yes, and he chose to ignore it, to pretend everything was normal while watching you treat your son like an inconvenience. I raised him, my mother said, standing now, her voice rising. I fed him, clothed him, put a roof over his head. I gave up everything for him. You never let him forget it, Margaret shot back. Not for one day of his life. You punished that child for existing, for having the audacity to be born, for ruining your perfect plans. He did ruin them. The words burst out of my mother like they'd been trapped for decades. I was 21 years old, Owen. I had my whole life ahead of me. I was going to be somebody. I was going to matter. And instead, I got stuck in Portland working at a department store, raising a child I never wanted while everyone else lived their dreams. The silence that followed was deafening. Emily stood up, her face flushed. How dare you? But I held up my hand. I was still sitting, still processing, still trying to understand how I'd lived 28 years not knowing this, but somehow knowing it all along. Did you ever... My voice came out rough, broken. I cleared my throat and tried again. Did you ever... love me? Even a little? My mother looked at me. Really looked at me. Maybe for the first time in my life. And on her face, I saw something that was almost pity. I don't know, she said finally. I honestly don't know if I ever did. The truth hung in the air between us like shattered glass, beautiful and terrible and impossible to unsee. My mother had just told me, told everyone, that she didn't know if she'd ever loved me, her own son. And the worst part was the relief in her voice, as if finally saying it out loud had freed her from some burden she'd been carrying. Emily erupted first. She stood so quickly her chair nearly toppled, her face flushed with a fury I'd never seen in her. How dare you, she said, her voice shaking. How dare you stand there and say that to him? He's your son. My mother's eyes flicked to Emily with something like disdain. You don't understand. No, I understand perfectly. Emily moved to stand beside me, her hand on my shoulder. You're a narcissist who blamed an innocent child for your own choices. You had options. You could have gone to Paris later. You could have built a career here. You could have given him up for adoption if you really couldn't love him, but instead you kept him and spent 28 years making him pay for existing. Emily, you need to calm down, my father said, finally finding his voice. He stood too, moving toward my mother like he needed to protect her. This is complicated. You don't understand the full situation. What's complicated about it? Emily's voice cut like a blade. She's abusing him. She's been emotionally abusing him his entire life. That's a bit dramatic. Is it? Emily turned on my father. You've been sitting there for how many years? 25?
watching her treat him like he's worthless, watching him try so hard to earn love he should have had unconditionally, and you did nothing. You're just as guilty as she is. My father's face reddened. Now wait just a minute. No, Robert, my grandmother's voice cut through, quiet but absolute. She's right. You chose Linda over your stepson again and again. You chose peace over protecting a child. You're just as culpable. He's not my real son, my father said, and immediately seemed to regret it. But the words were out now, floating in the air with all the other terrible truths. I know that, I said quietly. Everyone turned to look at me. I was still sitting, still holding Emily's hand, but something had shifted inside me. Something was breaking, or maybe it was being born. I stood up slowly, and it felt like rising from a grave. You want to know something funny? I looked at my mother. I spent my whole life thinking I was the problem, thinking if I could just be better, smarter, quieter, more successful, less needy, if I could just be different, then maybe you'd love me. Maybe you'd want me. My mother's expression didn't change. But it was never about me, was it? It was always about you, your dreams, your sacrifice, your resentment. I could have been perfect and it wouldn't have mattered, because the problem wasn't who I was. The problem was that I existed at all. Owen, my grandmother started, but I shook my head. I'm okay, Grandma. Actually, for the first time in my life, I think I'm going to be okay. I looked at Emily, saw the fierce love in her eyes, and felt something like hope blooming in my chest. Then I turned back to my mother. I have a question for you. She waited, arms crossed. You really consider me your biggest mistake? The room held its breath. My grandmother looked like she wanted to intervene. My father shifted uncomfortably. Emily's hand tightened on mine. My mother lifted her chin. You want the truth? Fine. Yes. I was 21 years old, Owen. I had the whole world in front of me. I had talent, I had ambition, I had a golden ticket to Paris, and you, she stopped, seemed to gather herself, then continued. Yes, you derailed everything. So yes, if I'm being honest, you were my biggest mistake. The words should have destroyed me. Maybe a week ago, they would have. But standing there with Emily beside me, with my grandmother's fierce love at my back, with the truth finally laid bare, I found I could breathe. I walked to the closet and pulled out my coat. Emily immediately grabbed hers. What are you doing? My mother asked. Leaving. Oh, here we go. She laughed, but it was bitter. Running away again. That's what you do, isn't it, Owen? When things get hard, you run. I stopped at the door and turned back. For a moment, I just looked at her. This woman who gave birth to me but never been my mother. This stranger whose approval I've chased for 28 years like a dog begging for scraps. No, Mom. For the first time in my life, I'm not running away. I'm running towards something. Toward the life I deserve. Toward people who actually want me in it. I felt Emily slip her hand into mine. I got offered a job in Barcelona, 2 years. I was hesitant about taking it because of you, because I thought maybe somehow we could fix this. But you know what I just realized? She said nothing. You spent 28 years blaming me for not going to Paris. 28 years making me feel guilty for ruining your dreams. But here's the thing, nobody stopped you from going after I was born. Grandma offered to help. You could have deferred, reapplied, tried again, but you didn't. You chose to stay here, to wallow in your resentment, to turn me into the villain of your story. That wasn't my fault. That was yours. I opened the door and cold December air rushed in. Merry Christmas, Mom.
The door closed behind us with a soft click that felt like the end of an era. Emily and I stood on the porch, snow falling around us in soft white flakes, our breath forming clouds in the cold air. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stood there, holding hands, while my whole world rearranged itself. Then I felt it, the weight I'd been carrying for 28 years, the constant pressure of trying to be good enough, lovable enough. It started to lift. Not all at once, not completely, but enough that I could breathe a little easier. Owen? Emily's voice was soft. Are you okay? I turned to look at her.
This woman who'd stood beside me, who'd fought for me when I didn't know how to fight for myself. I don't know, I said honestly, but I will be. We'd barely made it to the car when I heard the front door open again. My grandmother emerged, bundled in her coat, her small suitcase in one hand. "Wait," she called, moving down the walkway with surprising speed for an 82-year-old woman. "Please, wait!" We stopped. She reached us, slightly breathless, her cheeks pink from cold or emotion or both. "I'm so sorry," she said, looking up at me with tears in her eyes. "Owen, I'm so sorry. I should have said something years ago. I should have protected you better." I pulled her into a hug. This tiny, fierce woman who'd tried her best with an impossible situation. "It's not your fault, Grandma." "It is, though. Partly." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I knew what she was. I knew what she was doing to you, but I kept hoping she'd change, that she'd wake up one day and realize what she had. I was a coward." "You weren't." "I was, but I'm not anymore." She straightened her spine, and I saw the steel in her that had raised my mother alone, that had built a life after my grandfather died. "Come to my house, both of you. We'll have Christmas there, a real Christmas." So we drove through Portland's snowy streets to Lake Oswego, to my grandmother's cottage that always felt more like home than my parents' house ever did. She put on Christmas music, Bing Crosby and Nat King Cole, and we made hot chocolate while she heated up the ham she'd brought. Emily helped set the table, and for the first time all day, I felt something like peace. We talked for hours. My grandmother told me stories I'd never heard, about my mother as a young girl, brilliant and ambitious, but also brittle, unable to cope when life didn't go according to plan. About how she'd struggled after my grandfather died, how the offer to help raise me gave her purpose again. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, her hands wrapped around her mug, "keeping the family together. But I realize now I enabled her to hurt you. I'm sorry for that." Emily, who'd been quietly listening, spoke up. "Mrs. Chen, you can't blame yourself for someone else's choices. Linda chose to keep Owen. She chose to resent him. She chose to be cruel. Those were her decisions." My grandmother smiled sadly. "You're good for him. I can see that. He's good for me too." We ate dinner as the afternoon faded into evening, sharing stories and laughing at my grandmother's dry wit. She told Emily embarrassing stories about me as a kid, and Emily shared equally embarrassing stories about herself. For a few hours, I almost forgot the morning had happened. Almost. Around 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed. I pulled it out and saw my father's name on the screen. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the answer button. "You don't have to get that," Emily said softly. But I did. I needed to hear what he'd say. Needed to know if he'd finally found his spine. I answered. "Hello? Owen?" His voice was rough, like he'd been crying. "We need to talk. Your mother, she left. She packed a bag and left, and I don't know where she went. She won't answer my calls." He paused. "I think I made a terrible mistake. All these years, I think I made a terrible mistake." I looked at Emily, at my grandmother, at this warm kitchen that smelled like ham and cinnamon. I looked at the life I could have, the life I would have if I made the right choice now. "Dad, I can't help you with this. I can't fix your marriage or your guilt or whatever it is you're feeling. I have to take care of myself now." "Owen, please, I know I haven't been the father you needed." "No, you haven't. You chose her over me every single time. You stood by while she destroyed my self-worth piece by piece. You're right, you made a terrible mistake. You made hundreds of them for 25 years. Silence on the other end. But if you want to fix it, if you really want to try, then it can't be because Mom left and you're lonely. It can't be because you're scared or guilty. It has to be because you genuinely want a relationship with me. And that's going to take time, a lot of time. I understand, he said quietly. Do you? Because I'm moving to Barcelona. I'm taking the job, and I don't know when I'll be back. Another pause. That's probably for the best. Maybe we both need some time. We said goodbye, and I hung up. My grandmother was watching me with pride in her eyes. She said, "That was well done." I wasn't sure I agreed, but I knew it was necessary. I knew I couldn't keep lighting myself on fire to keep other people warm.
3 months later, I stood at the window of my apartment in Barcelona, watching the city come alive in the golden hour. The Gothic quarter sprawled below, all narrow streets and ancient stone, so different from Portland's green spaces and modern architecture. Behind me, Emily hummed as she made coffee in our tiny kitchen. Our apartment was small, just a one-bedroom in the Elborn neighborhood, but it was ours. We'd spent the past month making it home. Vintage posters from the flea market at Plaza de Sant Josep Oriol, plants crowding the windowsills, Emily's marketing books mixing with my design portfolios on the shelves. The move had been chaotic, selling my furniture, packing our lives into suitcases, saying goodbye to friends, but also exhilarating. Every step away from Portland felt like breathing deeper, standing taller. The job was everything I'd hoped for. The firm specialized in sustainable design, working with clients across Europe to create brands that were both beautiful and responsible. My colleagues were brilliant and kind, pushing me creatively while supporting my ideas. For the first time in my career, I felt like I belonged. Emily had transitioned to full remote work, taking morning meetings from our living room while I left for the office. She'd started learning Spanish, befriended the woman who ran the panaderia downstairs, discovered a love of Catalan wine. She bloomed here, and watching her bloom made me bloom too. My grandmother visited in February, staying for 2 weeks in a hotel near the beach. We showed her the city, walked Las Ramblas, ate paella at a tiny restaurant she declared almost as good as homemade. One evening, sitting at a cafe in Plaza Real, she'd taken my hand. "You look happy," she'd said. "Really happy. I don't think I've ever seen you like this." She was right. I was happy. Not in the manic, desperate way of someone trying to convince themselves they've made the right choice, but in the quiet, settled way of someone who's finally come home. My father had reached out a few times, careful emails asking about Barcelona, about work, sharing little details about his life. His divorce from Linda was moving forward. He'd started therapy. He wanted to try, he said, to be better. I responded politely, but kept my distance. Trust had to be earned, and he had decades of absence to make up for. Maybe someday we'd have a real relationship. Maybe not. Either way, I'd be okay. As for my mother, I'd heard nothing. My grandmother said Linda had moved to Seattle, was working as a manager at Nordstrom, had started dating someone. She'd asked Margaret not to mention her to me, which was fine. I had nothing to say to her anyway. Therapy helped. I'd found an English-speaking therapist in the Eixample district, a woman from London who specialized in family trauma. Twice a week, I sat in her sunny office and unpacked 28 years of damage. It was hard work, painful work, but necessary. "You're grieving," she told me in one session. "Not just the mother you had, but the mother you should have had. That's a real loss, Owen. It deserves to be mourned." So I mourned. I let myself feel the anger, the sadness, the bewilderment of a child who'd never understood why love had to be earned instead of given freely. And slowly, session by session, I started to heal. "Coffee's ready," Emily called from the kitchen. I turned from the window and smiled at her. She'd cut her hair short since we'd moved, and it suited her. Made her look bold, adventurous. She handed me a mug and kissed my cheek.
"Mail came," she said, nodding toward the small table by the door. I saw the package immediately. Brown paper, Portland postmark, my mother's handwriting. My stomach clenched. Do you want me to open it? Emily asked, gently. No, I will. I set down my coffee and picked up the package. It was light, flat. I tore open the brown paper and felt my breath catch. It was the photo album, the one I'd made for Christmas, the one I'd spent hours on, restoring old photos, arranging them chronologically, adding little captions about each memory, the one my mother had set aside without even opening. There was a note attached, written on her monogrammed stationery in her perfect script. I don't need this. That was all. No apology, no explanation, just those 4 words. I stood there holding it, feeling the familiar ache start to rise in my chest. The old Owen would have crumbled, would have analyzed those 4 words for hidden meaning, for some sign that she cared, that she regretted, that she loved me after all. But I wasn't that Owen anymore. Emily moved beside me, her hand on my back. Owen? I looked at the album, at the hours of work I'd put into it, at the love I'd tried to pack into every page. Then I looked around our apartment, at the life we'd built, at the future we were creating. You know what? I said, setting the album on the table. She's right. I don't need it either. What do you mean? I picked up the album again, but this time I really looked at it. Not at what it represented, my desperate attempt to make my mother love me, but at what it actually was. A chronicle of my past, of a life spent trying to be enough for someone who would never think I was. I'm going to make a new one, I said. Fill it with photos of this life, our life, Barcelona, our apartment, our friends here, my work, your work, Grandma's visit, everything we're building. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Owen. I said, she gave me back my past, but I don't need it anymore. I have my future. I pulled out my phone and took the first photo. Emily in our kitchen, morning light streaming through the window, tears on her cheeks and a smile on her face. Then I took one of the view from our window, the Barcelona skyline painted in gold. Then one of the 2 of us together, selfie style, grinning like idiots. These, I said, showing her the photos, these are what matter. Not what I lost, but what I found. We spent the rest of the morning like that, documenting our life. Our favorite cafe, the bookstore where Emily practiced her Spanish, the park where we had picnics on weekends, the office where I worked. Every photo was a declaration. This is my life now. This is who I choose to be. Later that afternoon, I started the new album. On the first page, I wrote, "The story of Owen Smith begins in Barcelona at age 28 when he finally learned that family isn't always blood, love isn't something you have to earn, and mistakes aren't always what they seem." Because here's what I'd learned in those 3 months. My mother was wrong. I wasn't her biggest mistake. I was her greatest loss. She'd been given a gift, a child, a chance to love and be loved unconditionally, and she'd thrown it away. She'd chosen bitterness over joy, resentment over connection, pride over love. That was her tragedy, not mine.
Mine was the years I'd wasted believing her narrative, believing I was unlovable, believing I was the problem. But that tragedy had an expiration date, and it was behind me now. I looked at Emily, curled up on our secondhand couch with her Spanish textbook. I thought about my grandmother, fierce and loving, who'd finally found the courage to tell the truth. I thought about the city outside our window, full of possibilities I was just beginning to explore. And I thought about my mother, alone in Seattle, with her resentment and her what-ifs, still blaming a 28-year-old decision for a lifetime of unhappiness. I hoped someday she'd find peace. I hoped she'd realize that Paris was never the answer, that running from herself would never work. I hoped she'd look back and see what she'd lost. But even if she didn't, I'd be okay. Because I'd learned something that Christmas Day, standing in my parents' living room with my world falling apart. You can't force someone to love you. You can't fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. You can't make yourself small enough to fit into a space that was never meant for you. All you can do is walk away, build a new life, find people who choose you the way you choose them, and let the weight of other people's mistakes Stay where it belongs. With them, not you. The Barcelona sunset outside our window, painting everything gold and pink and beautiful. Emily looked up from her book and smiled at me. In the distance, church bells rang. "Happy?" she asked. I smiled back. "Yeah, I really am." And I was. For the first time in my 28 years, I was genuinely, completely, impossibly happy. Not because my life was perfect, it wasn't. Not because the pain had disappeared, it hadn't. But because I'd finally learned the most important lesson of all. My mother's inability to love me was never about my worth. It was about her capacity. And I'd spent my whole life trying to expand something that was always going to stay small. I was done making myself small to match it. I was done earning love that should have been free. I was done being anyone's mistake. From now on, I was just going to be Owen. Flawed, healing, hopeful Owen. Living in Barcelona with the woman I loved, building a life that was entirely my own, filling a photo album with moments that mattered. And if that wasn't enough for some people, well, that was their loss, not mine. I raised my coffee mug in a silent toast to the version of me who'd stood in that Portland kitchen 3 months ago, broken and bleeding and brave enough to walk away. I whispered to him. To me. To the person I'd been and the person I was becoming. Outside, Barcelona sparkled in the dying light. Inside, Emily laughed at something in her textbook. Somewhere, my grandmother was probably making dinner and thinking about her next visit. And somewhere in Seattle, my mother was alone with her regrets. But that wasn't my story anymore. This was.